Hey everybody, it's Nicola Chin, founder of Up With Community, and I'm here today with Gia Drew, Program Director of Equality Maine. We're here for another brass tacks conversation of a question that has been rattling through my mind and my heart. What is the role of forgiveness? And as I was thinking about this question, I was really interested to hear what Gia would have to say. So, Gia,
hey.
when I ask you, hey, what's the role of forgiveness in our movement? Like, what kind of comes up for you?
It's a really interesting question. You say our movement, and so maybe I'll start with that question back to you. Oh, sorry, you said our movement. I'm like, I'm part of a lot of movements. Like I'm part of like social justice movements. I'm part of like gender justice. I'm part of like LGBT justice.
When I framed that question, I was really wondering, do I say our movements or our work?
I don't know.
You know, and so I guess like maybe I want to make it more general.
Okay.
And not within a specific like area. But the reason I didn't want to use the word work is because it feels like it's more than just work. It's not just like what we get paid in our 9 to 5.
We get paid?
Oh, yeah.
Wait. Someone
Somebody
out there.
Get paid.
Come on,
yeah,
let's go.
Yeah, so like what is the role of forgiveness maybe like being in our communities?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for reaching out and having me here today. You know, I think about the word forgiveness. And it's a big part of my life, and it's been there at my core for many years. I think the first person who really taught me about forgiveness was Nelson Mandela. I was a college student at Syracuse, and we were fighting to divest our community from South Africa at the time because they were invested and it was still apartheid. And I learned about what was going on in South Africa and learning about Nelson Mandela and everything that was happening in this country, you know, halfway across the globe, and I was deeply connected to it for many reasons. And then when he was finally released and he talked about forgiveness, it was so profound. It came from this place of a heart that I didn't know anyone could have a heart that big. You know, someone who was, you know, held captive and imprisoned for decades, willing to forgive his captors and the people who had created this, you know, inhumane system. Really spoke to me as someone who has, you know, felt discrimination and betrayal and violence. To see someone turn to their enemy and say, "I forgive you," and they weren't even asking for it, you know, really touched me at a place when I really needed to hear that. So it's been part of who I am as a person, and my work, and for a very long time.
You know what I really wrestle with when I look at the South Africa model and even try to apply it to myself is how do you seek forgiveness from folks who aren't asking for it, or how do you connect on forgiveness? You know, because, you know, I think about in so many of our movements, we're like, you know, we're in the middle of like passing a bill or trying to change a policy or something. And then when it's all over and someone's quote unquote won, how do we still live in community, no matter who won or not?
Right.
And so what do you think about that, trying to find forgiveness in a context where someone isn't even asking for it?
Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. I don't have a really good answer on the spot, but
you
know, in leading up to this conversation, and I was thinking about the word forgiveness and the history for me personally, and I think I've had to deal a lot with my own personal forgiveness as a human, which is hard. You know, I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. And because of that, I also hurt people. And so I've had to learn to forgive myself for some of the things I did as a young person, and that's been really hard. And I would like to ask, you know, and talk to people who I hurt and ask for their forgiveness. And there's some people I want to confront, and some of them aren't here anymore either. They're dead. You know, the one person, you know, who really impacted my life, who abused me as a child, I can't talk to them. They're gone. And so I've had to come up with a way of dealing with forgiveness for my own personal self. Like this idea of me and forgiveness, what does that look like? And then there's this bigger conversation on us as a community, as a movement, which may be connected to my personal forgiveness stuff. And that's been really, that's actually more of a challenge for me.
Tell me why.
Because I am one voice, you know, in this giant movement of social justice, and I know specifically in the work here and the work I do, especially around LGBTQ issues, there's been a lot of history of violence and ignorance and discrimination against many parts of the community, especially parts that I'm part of somewhat, especially being a trans person. You know, how do I represent this larger LGBTQ community who has turned its backs on the trans community for so long? How do I do the work? Do I forgive those things that have happened in the past for all sorts of reasons? So I do wrestle with that. I have not come to a really soft landing with that right now. I feel like I'm walking on eggs sometimes around this issue of the history of this movement that I'm deeply a part of and moving forward. And can we do, you know, multiple things at the same time? Can we work towards forgiveness, and can we keep moving the work forward?
Yeah, and that's so hard when when we have these big societal moments where all of a sudden people wake up and they're like, "Oh, this is a thing," and it's like, "Hey, actually, it's been a thing for our whole humanity."
Right, sure.
Like, this didn't just happen like 5 years ago with like one TV show or something. And so, but I want to come back to what you said about starting with personal.
Yeah.
And I think that's so deep. To start with, how do we also seek forgiveness, not just how do we forgive others, and understand our ways of both being aggressor and victim in the same spot. Like, are there any supports that helped you in that journey, whether it was talking to people, books, anything that helped you?
I think for me, the biggest part for me was finding a community, or my community, whatever that looks like. You know, that's a hard thing to feel so alone for such a long time and not really feel like you're part of something. Can be really damaging to someone's ego and to their health and well-being. And so when I started stepping into very gently, especially the trans community here in Maine, I finally found a family I didn't know existed, you know, and to connect with on a very deep level without having to say very much, just to recognize and sit in that place in a room with maybe a support group or march in a parade or whatever, and to know we have a common experience. Really helped me sort of connect to a community where we could start talking about the idea of forgiveness, whether we're forgiving ourselves or the people we are connected with, our families, our work, whatever that looks like. So that for me was a really important starting point on that journey, for sure.
You know what that reminds me of? You know, when I think about forgiveness, sometimes I think about when I seek forgiveness, it almost feels like I have to take the risk of making myself completely vulnerable and visible.
Yeah.
And there's so many things about my experience as a woman of color, as a multiracial woman, where I spend so much time trying to hide or protect or divert. Like, look at this thing over here so that you don't see this part. And what I find so transformational about forgiveness, and why I think forgiveness for me has to be a part of our work, is because it forces me to step into that being visible. I'm curious if you have that same experience or different.
No, that's really interesting. I think a lot about how I present myself to the world. And it's taking me, you know, I've been in this part of the work for like the last 7 years or so. And I think about that, like I put up this front, this facade about being this perfect, whatever, role model.
Strong, feeling good.
Strong, like, yeah. But to what end? So where does that get me? You know, it portrays, you know, a false idea of who I am as a person, and this idea that as a bisexual trans person, I need to be better than other people just to, whatever that is. So not, you know, it's just a weird place to be. And I think I am learning how to be vulnerable for sure. And I'm seeing vulnerability for the first time in probably my whole life as a sign of strength, as a place I can sit into and just be me, with all my flaws. You know, and that's a hard place to be if you're in one of those, if you inhabit multiple marginalized communities, you know.
Yes.
And I come from a place where I live with mental illness and my transness, but I also recognize some of my privileges in this. And so how do I reconcile all that and keep those, you know, balls in there and juggle that and do the work? and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Which I didn't last night.
Oh no!
I was attacked by some monsters in my dream or something.
Aww.
That's another.
That's a different trend.
Another video.
Yeah, and you know this idea of like making myself vulnerable when I'm seeking forgiveness. It really it came up for me last week, where I was like practicing right with some folks, not even realizing that I was going to practice, and I just kind of said, you know, I'm sorry, and I shared my vulnerability, and what I realized is in a culture where we're not used to. We find space to practice forgiveness with others, you know? How do we do that?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I think it doesn't come, I don't think it comes naturally, or at least we're not taught that. Many of us, I know I wasn't taught, I was a little bit because I was raised in Catholicism, and there's a lot of forgiveness. Right?
But it's like...
But it's a really strange forgiveness.
It feels like forgiveness at a gunpoint. Like,
It's
get in this box, say you're sorry.
Oh, don't go there.
Oh, sorry. I had the same thing.
Oh, you did? Okay. So
No, I was in confessionals.
Yes.
You know, where you're by yourself in like second grade.
Yes.
Talking in the dark.
Yes.
And praying to be forgiven.
I know.
Okay, sorry. We don't go further.
Thank you. That's a whole nother...
Okay.
Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay. And one of the other groups that really helped me was a writer's group. I go every year. I disappear from this world and go to this little place, very privileged little place in the woods with a bunch of other writers, and they're from all walks of life. And we make a deal with each other that we're going to write and we're going to read things unapologetically. We're not going to make like statements ahead of what we wrote, like declarations, like, oh, this is half done, or this is, you know, a thought. We're gonna write it and we're gonna share it without those apologies.
And we're gonna practice.
We're gonna practice that, and it's been really helpful.
Ooh.
For sure. To not put those disclaimers ahead of saying something like, I apologize if I offend anybody, or this really isn't a complete thought, or, and I think that probably comes from, definitely some places, and that's been helpful, just to say it unapologetically, see where it lands.
And do you do that here in Maine?
Or
is it national? Is it a
no,
national project?
That's just a group of writers that are writers in art retreat.
Great.
In upstate New York.
Great, because I'm so curious about what it would look like to have more spaces like that in Maine.
Yeah. Actually, I was just talking to someone the other day at the Maine Transnet just held their wellness conference, and my unit was on storytelling. I love storytelling. It's like my little thing that I really cherish. Yeah. And some of the folks after said, we should have like a writer's group.
That's great.
Of people in the work. Yeah. I'm like, please, let's do that. Let's make that happen. That made me all happy.
This will be our shout out. If anybody wants us, let us know. Great. Well, this is lovely. Thank you so much, Gia.
Oh,
I appreciate your time.
This has been great.
Wonderful.
Thanks for asking me.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day, y'all. Bye.